Yesterday in the Locked On Steelers podcast, we talked about the potential return of Bud Dupree if some crazy things happen, but we have to talk about Alex Highsmith and the edge rusher position in the NFL draft. All that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, with Jenna Hornaday from Channel 11. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As I said, we're joined by Jenna Hornaday. She's back on the Friday episode again. Jenna, how you doing?
Chris, I am doing wonderfully. It's definitely weird. No football for this weekend. It's a little strange. I'm not going to lie, but we are back. We're great and excited to chat some edge rushers and some Alex Highsmith and Bud Dupree and all the fun things.
So, yeah, we're going to get into that in a bit here. Now, this stems from part of yesterday's episode that I did where I was talking about potential free agents the Steelers could bring back at some point. And part of that conversation was Bud Dupree, because a lot of people were talking about Juju Smith-Schuster and Javon Hargrave. But though, I think Juju's going to stick with the Chiefs because he's with Patrick Mahomes. I think Hargrave's going to be way too expensive. There are some people projecting that his salary cap hit could be as much as $20 million when he hits free agency this year. The Steelers aren't paying anything like that. The player who I think could come back is Bud Dupree, though, because if you look back at his last two seasons with the Titans, he's only had 7 sacks in 22 games. He's missed at least 6 games in each of those seasons. And in that time, having only 7 sacks, he's about to be a $20 million cap hit himself on the Titans. And much like Myles Jack last year, I just see that as a situation where that's a team that has to create some cap space because they need some moves to make. And you can't be paying a guy who only has 7 sacks in 2 years $20 million. So that's a possibility that I have there, Jenna. And I wanted to get your thoughts on, you've been here to see Bud Dupree in Pittsburgh and what he meant to the Steelers. And obviously he wouldn't come back and take Alex Highsmith's job. We'll get to Alex Highsmith in a second. But the possibility of an upgraded Highsmith with a defensive MVP caliber TJ Watt and Bud Dupree in there as support, I think that can do a lot for the Steelers' pass rush hopes.
Yeah, and it definitely sounds incredibly exciting, right? I know so many fans in the short time that I was here that covering Bud Dupree, fans loved him. Guys in that locker room absolutely loved him. We know the relationship that he and TJ Watt had. And I think this could be kind of a good thing if this is the direction the Steelers do want to go and move into, because his numbers unfortunately just haven't been what I think he or the Titans thought they were going to be when he did leave the Steelers because of the caliber of the season he was having when he did leave in free agency, right? I want to make sure.
Yeah. I mean, the Steelers just couldn't pay him and the Titans just gave him a massive payday.
That's right. I was trying to remember all the little moves and things like that. But that's one of the big things is like he priced himself out and it makes sense. But this could be kind of a situation where he's pricing himself back in. He might be able to do that. And he's one of those guys too, that you look around the locker room and you look for those veteran type of guys that have that presence that kind of emulate that true Steelers mentality. And he was someone that always stuck out to me as like, this guy knows what it means to be a Pittsburgh Steeler. This guy embodies what it means to be part of this organization. And he makes sure that a lot of the younger guys, and I mean, I'm not calling him old by any means, but he makes sure, the guys around him understand as well. And those voices in the locker room are something we know. Mike Tomlin and the rest of the coaching staff and the front office, the likes of Omar, those guys absolutely love having guys like that in the locker room. And it could be something intriguing too, where again, it would have, obviously so many things would have to happen, but it would have to be one of those things where he would have to be content knowing he's coming back to a team where he's not going to have an immediate starting role, but being able to rotate the 3 guys, TJ, Alex, and Bud. I think that could do really, really well for a Steelers pass rush that needs to get after quarterbacks. And that's something that they look at as their identity here.
And let's also consider Alex Highsmith, because I think the Steelers are going to be in a position where Alex Highsmith has the potential to be one of those guys who either you pay to keep around long term. I mean, this guy just had 14 and a half sacks,
Yeah.
in a normal NFL season. That'd be in the market to be a top 5 pass rusher, and in what he was able to bring. And then you can only imagine what that number would have been if TJ Watt was healthy all season. And if the Steelers would have been, they ended up in the season with 40 sacks on the year, which isn't bad. But there were just a lot of teams ahead of them this year, like the Chiefs, who had 55, and the Eagles, who had 70. And we'll get to that notion in a bit here. But Alex Highsmith, I think, has made himself a very important part of this defense. And I know that the Steelers are paying a lot for their defense, but Alex Highsmith, after this season, he's still on his rookie contract, but after the season, he becomes free. In 2024, the Steelers currently have slated $111 million in cap space. Now, that's going to take a hit because this year they're going to sign some free agents. They're also going to probably restructure some contracts to move some of the money from this year to next year. So that can drop anywhere maybe to like 90 or 80 million, I think, if they were aggressive in some of the things that they could do. But that's still more than enough space to sign a guy like Alex Highsmith to play alongside TJ Watt. And the question then becomes, do you make a move like that financially to commit to having 2 paid edge rushers paid very well and make them the primary spots of your defense? Because then if you're paying that much, you're already paying TJ Watt some of the biggest money that an edge rusher can get paid in the NFL. If you're paying Alex Highsmith, you're going to pay him very well. And that then takes away from where you're going to be able to contribute to other spots in your team. Jenna, is that a move that you definitely make a move as the Steelers, or is that something that you consider, hey, you know what? You love TJ Watt. You trust your ability to draft. Maybe you make a move to maybe trade Alex Highsmith before then, or you let him hit free agency, get a comp pick from that when he gets his payday.
And that's kind of a tough question. That's one of the, the $1 million questions I think so many people will want answers to. And it was so funny because when we were doing the end of the year interviews with all the players and we're talking with Alex Highsmith and all of a sudden we're talking contract, I was like, yeah, it's one of those moments you're like, oh, wait, oh my, like you feel like he's been here for 3 seasons, but it's, you feel like he's been here so much longer in that, or so much shorter in that way. So you're like, oh my gosh, it is time for all of this to happen. And, for these talks to begin to happen and formulate and see what the Steelers do. But realistically, in my mind, you have to keep him. You drafted him the way that you did. He's such a focal point. We talk about guys in the locker room, like I just mentioned, the true type of Steeler. That also to me is a guy like Alex Highsmith, and just the way that we see him go out and work every day, and not, knocking any other guys, but he's always been that type of player where he had that, walk-on mentality. He has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, but it's so intriguing to see how he uses it too, because he's one of those players that's just like, I want to be better. I want to get better every day. When he had 12 sacks and he reached his goal to start this, that he said at the beginning of the season, he said, I want more. I want 14. I want to keep going. I want it. Like, that is just the motor that he has. He's a guy that Mike Tomlin absolutely loves. He's a guy that a lot of the defense loves. And it's been really also intriguing to kind of see the leadership role and the steps he's taken, because he was telling me in one of the one-on-ones I did with him earlier this season how he's not really that vocal leader, and he was challenged this year to step into that role a little bit more. And I think there was so much, conversation surrounding when TJ went down, more of him kind of picking things up and taking on a bigger, I don't want to say workload, but just a bigger responsibilities. And we saw him thrive in that role, no doubt about that. And he's just somebody that I think the Steelers need to make a priority to keep long-term. And I think there's definitely going to be a way to do it. But I can't see the Steelers also not wanting to keep him as part of this organization. And, I don't think we're going to see any, crazy Le'Veon Bell type of, contract stuff with Alex Highsmith, because he just, you can see he just wants something that's going to be fair and something that shows that the Steelers want him there and they want to keep him. And I think that's going to be one of, knock on wood, I don't entirely know, but I feel like it's going to be a little bit one of the more easier negotiations compared to some of the guys that, just might get their foot stuck in the mud and say, I'm not budging from the spot here.
No, I feel you on that. And I think Alex Highsmith, you're right. Like, I think he values the Steelers locker room and the Steelers community that they have within the organization. Just talking to him, I talk to him a lot, and we all do. You know, he's always very, very kind of pleasant and, you know, always happy to talk with us. But he's always happy to kind of talk up the Steelers and what they've done for him in his career. And likewise, I think the Steelers like that. But we know Mike Tomlin, for all the reasons you said, the Steelers want to keep players like that, but the Steelers love to keep their own homegrown guys that they've drafted. We'll talk more about this and how this relates to, I think, some of the better teams in the NFL that the Steelers need to either be keeping up with or catching up to. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL and one of the sportsbook partners of the NBA. And we're at the midway point of the NBA season now, with the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets that you get back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. FanDuel lets you play player prop bets and gives you so many options. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI in Pittsburgh. Jenna, I wanted to ask you more so about this because I look at teams like the teams that we saw in the Super Bowl, the Eagles and the Chiefs, and two things that both of those teams did very well on defense, if nothing else, was get after the quarterback. The Chiefs had 55 sacks, which in a normal year would lead the NFL. In fact, I think the Steelers led the NFL with 55 sacks at one point in their 5-year reign of leading the NFL in sacks. But the Eagles went on a phenomenal tear of getting 70 sacks this season, and it was crazy. But one thing we saw in the Super Bowl was the Chiefs pass rush won out. They were able to get to Hurts a couple times. They even forced a fumble of Hurts that was scooped up and scored by a pass rusher, Nick Bolton, who came up as an off-ball linebacker who came in and brought pressure, scooped the ball, and scored. And to me, it was one of the more pivotal plays of the game because the Eagles at the time looked unstoppable, and that touchdown kind of kept the Chiefs in it in the first half. And you saw them be able to get after the quarterback, and Patrick Mahomes not even sacked once by this Eagles pass rush that was getting after people all season. To me, like, I know a lot of people were saying, pointing to the offense. And yes, it was 38-35 at the end of the game, but still an important part I think that the Steelers have going for them is the ability to get the quarterback and get him down to stop plays and set teams back the way that the Chiefs were able to do to the Eagles in some key situations.
Absolutely. And I want to say one thing. Who had in the parade yesterday? Or the other day, did you see who had like the 0 sacks shirt for the Chiefs? One of the.
Oh, yeah. I forget. It wasn't Creed Humphrey. I think it was Orlando Brown. Orlando Brown who had. Yes. Yep.
So, I mean, that like in itself is such a testament that the Chiefs, made that something that, they wanted to say, hey, look, you said all season long, look what you guys were going to do and look what you didn't do. And we know how crucial it is. And you're right. That is something that the Steelers make so much of their identity. And I think that's why, you look back and yes, you can take kind of week 1 in itself, its own context, but why the Steelers were able to beat the Bengals week 1 in part was just because of the pressure they applied to Joe Burrow. And that's something you're going to have to do continuously in this division when you're going against Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson for a full season next year. All of those, high caliber quarterbacks. And then again, you're in a conference with Josh Allen, with Patrick Mahomes. This, in my opinion, looking at the AFC, when you look at, quote, elite quarterbacks, I think there are so many more in the AFC themselves right now, I should say, that the Steelers end up having to face at one point or another, or you're just going to have to face if you want a chance at the Super Bowl. And that is something that you're going to have to be able to do. Your defense is going to have to be able to apply pressure. Your defense is going to have to be able to get after the quarterback. And there were parts this season, and yes, obviously TJ Watt's absence in the middle of the season was really tough for the Steelers to be able to create more and generate more of that pass rush. But there were so many parts in the season where I feel like we were talking about the lack of pass rush created by these guys, and you could sense the frustration among them. And yes, Alex Highsmith had great numbers. Cam Hayward got in there too. All of these guys did make key roles and did make key plays, but it's going to have to be so much more consistent because of the guys that you're facing. And it is something we always talk about, that the Steelers use as part of their identity. I mean, there's a reason it's called Blitzburg, just because of the way that they can time the blitzes and they can create all the pressure against these really high caliber quarterbacks. And I want to keep going back to week 1 because we saw Joe Burrow. I think it was unlike any Joe Burrow I'd seen up to that point.
Yeah. No, yeah, it was. I mean, he was rattled. First play of the game, Cam Hayward's in the backfield. Second play of the game, it's a pick 6.
Yeah.
And we see, I think one thing that, despite the narrative that that everything is based on the offense, I think one thing we see, and something that you've seen as a Giants fan growing up, pass rush can ruin everything. Everyone thought that the Patriots offense was unstoppable for years. And what was the thing that dismantled them? The 4-man fronts that the Giants just kept throwing at them that Tom Brady couldn't handle him. It rattled him, it limited him, and it allowed Eli Manning to do just enough to get the Giants over the hump. And I think that's why both of us picked the Eagles, because I thought their pass rush was going to do that to Patrick Mahomes. Yep. Now, that's not saying that their pass rush couldn't have ever done it, because they I think that they could have, and they just didn't work out that game. But this is where I think the Steelers' bread and butter could be next year. And the one thing I'll also point out is that, and something that I thought would catch up with the Eagles earlier than it did, was their run defense was not great all year long. If you go back and you look at the numbers that they were allowing, the Eagles were actually one of the, in the middle to the bottom half of the NFL in allowing 121.6 rushing yards per game. That's well behind the Steelers defense, which was a top 10 run stuffing unit this year. And to me, that was something I was like, that's going to catch up with them. And sure enough, in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs were running all over them. And it wasn't like they just ran the ball, but it allowed them to have a balance so that when Patrick Mahomes, he didn't have to keep dropping back, and it limited how many times he had to put himself in risky situations that they could sack him. And in fact, you look back at Isaiah Pacheco, 76 yards and 15 carries for over 5 yards per carry. Jared McKinnon, 4 carries for 34 yards, over 8 yards per carry. And those type of situations, that opens up so many other things. And that's where, again, I think the Steelers have something. They kind of fixed the run defense this year. They went from, not kind of, but they did. They went from dead last in the NFL last year to top 10 this year in run defense. And if they're able to keep that while adding, making sure their edge rusher room is set, either, one, making sure Alex Highsmith's there for the long term, adding a guy like Bud Dupree. They already brought back Quincy Roche, which could be very interesting for the long run, because he was the late draft pick that they let get away, that everyone was like, God, did they let you do that? But also keep finding a way to add to that position room. If they do that, I think the Steelers put themselves in the position to have a strength that can dismantle some of the better offenses in the NFL. Because when I look back at this year at Patrick Mahomes, some of the worst passer ratings that he had in the year was when he was getting hit the most, even though they beat the Titans earlier this year. They won 20-17. He had his lower passer rating of the season with 80.9. He was sacked 4 times that game. And in each of their losses this season, he was sacked multiple times, except the Colts loss, because that was just a weird loss anyways.
I forget
how the Chiefs lost to the Colts, I still do not know. But you look back at their loss to the Bills and their loss to the Chiefs, or the loss to the Bengals in the season. Both games came with multiple sacks where those pass rushes were getting after Patrick Mahomes. And this goes for, like you said, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, anybody. I mean, heck, when the Steelers beat Josh Allen, at the start of the 2021 season, they were getting after him. Yeah. I think that's why this still should be a major focus for the Steelers, to make sure that they have the best in the NFL. They could give him the best support that maybe you get as a second option in the NFL. I think they just need to make sure that they keep that as a healthy rotation for the years to come.
Yeah, and that's the key word right there, healthy, making sure that, obviously you can't predict injuries. You don't know when they're going to happen. You don't know all these extensive things. But if you can have a trio that rotates out the way that, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and enter other edge rusher here, those guys, you can continually stay fresh and you can continually throw different looks at these quarterbacks and be able to say, okay, hey, you think you have, a chance here? No, we're shutting you down here. We're coming after you here. We're blitzing you here. We're doing X, Y, and Z to get to you in this way.
I hear you on that. The other thing that they could do, even if they don't bring in Bud Dupree, is add to the NFL draft. We'll get into the possibilities of that and some of the edge rusher prospects that we could be talking about and where they could be taking some of those guys in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we're going to talk to you about a game that's going to let you be the GM and pick your own edge rushing prospects at the Ultimate Pro Football GM game, which you can download at any point in time on your mobile device. If you've ever dreamed about being an NFL GM, this is your chance, because with Ultimate Pro Football GM, you not only get to be the GM, you get to pick your team, your colors, where they're at. You can build stadiums, you can build scouting rooms, you can pick the coaches, you can pick the staff, the doctors, the psychiatrists, everything that you want on this team, you can make on your own. Then throughout the year, you can trade players, you can draft players, you can say who's going to do what, you can deal with players who step out of line. All those things can be happening right here in this game. Simulate seasons, go by fast. I finished seasons in as fast as 5 minutes. And then your goal is to win as many championships as you can with every 25-year run. I did 25 seasons and won 19. Can you do better? Prove me that you can by downloading Ultimate Football GM, which is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go and whenever you want to. And Locked On Steelers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise by using the promo code Locked On. It's LOCKEDON. Locked On, all capital letters, all one word, when you go into the game store of Ultimate Pro Football GM. Just make sure to do that in the game store. But to download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined again today by Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, the Steelers currently have, as far as picks this year, their first round pick at 17th overall. Their 2 second-round picks at 32nd overall and 49th overall. Then a third-round pick at 80th overall, a fourth-round pick at 120th. Then they don't have any fifth or sixth-round picks, but they have 2 seventh-round picks at 236 and 243. So that being said, where the Steelers want to attack this year in the NFL draft is going to be interesting. I'll also remind people, Mock Draft Monday is coming next Monday. So if you all missed that point of fun of the offseason, it's going to be back. I'll be posting on my Twitter and in our Facebook group of the Locked On Steelers Facebook group for you guys to post your mock drafts. I'll pick through them, see what's the best ones, and then we'll go from there, and we'll bring it up on the Monday episode next week. So be tuned for Mock Draft Monday. But here's some inside looks that we're giving you on these positions. Now, here's the thing, Jenna. If you have TJ Watt and you have Alex Highsmith, and maybe you sign a Bud Dupree, I look at this and I don't think edge rusher is a position that the Steelers should even think about considering in the first round or even with the 32nd overall pick. No. Unless your plan is to not pay Alex Highsmith and you know that he's going to be on the move after next season because you think that he's just going to command Bud Dupree type money and someone's just going to overpay him next year, then that's the case there. But I look at this draft class and I see, man, there's guys who I think that if they waited on until maybe the third round, like a KJ Henry or of Clemson, I think that there could be guys like Will McDonald IV. I think those are guys that they could be looking at to say like, hey, these guys, they're not instant starters, but they're guys that down the line, maybe they prove to be something that's something you could develop as a backup option behind your starting guys.
Yeah, because again, that's what we're talking about, getting kind of that rotation in there too. And what better guys to learn from than TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. What better tandem? I'm sure there's a couple across the league, but in my opinion, this, for a young guy, if the Steelers do decide to go this route, could be something incredibly beneficial where, hey, it's not like you have to plug and play him immediately. It's not like, oh my gosh, there's a gaping need here. This is something that could be, hey, we're looking ahead to the future here. We're investing in a mid-round guy for this type of scenario. Because Highsmith was what, a third-round guy?
Third-round pick, yep.
Yeah. Highsmith was a third-round pick. And so, obviously, you never know exactly how things are going to pan out and what's going to happen. But to me, I don't think that drafting an edge rusher using, honestly, the first 3 picks, to me, I don't think it's an absolute need, unless you're right. There's some sort of bigger plan here where they're not planning on paying Alex Highsmith, which I don't really realistically see happening, but hey, you never know. Who knows? To me, it's just, there's so many other positions of need that I don't think that that's exactly where the Steelers are going to be looking. But at the same time, again, that 4th round pick, or even because they have the 2/3.
Right. They have 2 seconds.
And then the third. Yeah. So maybe, maybe in that 3rd and 4th pick, you look kind of in that direction if that's where they feel they need to go. And yeah, you can get some pretty solid guys around those marks, maybe like you said, KJ Henry from Clemson, something along those lines that all of a sudden it's like, hey, there might be a little bit of a shift here. And again, this guy can work and learn under TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, get some reps in eventually when the Steelers are like, hey, we feel like you're ready at this point to be part of this rotation here.
Right. And I think that's what happened with Alex Highsmith. He was drafted behind Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. And, he started to work his way in when Bud Dupree would get hurt, and then he found his spot. And then eventually he became the starter because they could trust him. And I do think that, once you get to that 3rd round, after you get past the top 50 picks, that's when you can start looking at it. I'd still be interested in looking at other positions because they need to fortify the offensive line. We've talked about linebacker, cornerback, all those needs. Edge rusher is that one position that I think if you can find a sneaky way to get a good prospect in the 3rd round, then okay, maybe, but definitely a 4th round pick. That's what seems more like if you wanted to be aggressive and find a person there, a diamond in the rough, that could be good there. And then you can always use 7th round picks. But to me, like when people talk about 7th round picks, like, oh man, why'd they spend it on a punter or a backup quarterback? And I'm just like, guys, 7th round picks are very close to undrafted free agents. Like there's a lot of people complaining, why didn't they go get a running back with the 7th round pick when they went and got Jalen Warren as an undrafted free agent? Like it's the most useless conversation I've always heard. But in those 7th round picks, that's where you could find flyers that you're taking on guys that you're like, we liked some things that this guy had. Let's just grab him and bring him to camp and see what happens along with the other undrafted free agents. But that's why I think that 4th round pick can be really tricky for the Steelers. We'll get into the potential of maybe trading down that the Steelers have. There's trading up, trading down. There's all those conversations that we'll eventually have because in throughout the long off season. And if they trade down, maybe they pick up another 4th round pick or a 3rd round pick or a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick. Maybe they pick up one of those. But I think that the answer could be finding guys that fit that 4th round range where the start of day 3, you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, can the Steelers just jump in and get a prospect here? That's where I think the safe zone might be for the Steelers finding edge rushers this year.
Yeah, and that's the safe zone. The way that you phrase that is kind of just so perfect because I think, if all of a sudden the Steelers came out at 17 and picked an edge rusher, I think there'd be a lot of people up in arms. Or even with that 32nd pick, you probably could make the case for their again, I probably would. I mean, again, I'm not a GM, but if I did have my GM hat on, I would probably not even use the second round pick. And even again, the 3rd round pick to me is still a little bit dicey, but that does feel like kind of like this sweet spot where it's like, all right, we've addressed, defensive line, offensive line, cornerback, whatever other position they decide to use with those first 4 picks, that when you get to the 4th round, it's like, hey, okay, this could potentially be an option here. Who's on the board? And again, I feel like I'm going to be really intrigued to see, and we're going to talk about this a ton the offseason, but just kind of the draft strategy that Omar Khan and Andy Weidel come in with and how, if any, it differs from Steelers drafts of the past. But maybe this will be kind of one of those scenarios where they look to say, hey, look, we're going to look ahead to the future here. We know that edge rusher is not a dire immediate position of need, but it might be. We're going to need to get somebody else in, and they're kind of, benefiting in that way and planning ahead versus feeling like, oh my God, we have this big gaping hole here. This isn't going to work. We got to fill this right now.
Absolutely. I think that we're both on the same page here.
Yeah.
Edge rusher in the draft doesn't need to be a priority. It's one that if a guy slips to you think is amazing, okay, then yeah, sure. But keep that option, for later in the draft. Once you get to day 3, use those day 1 and day 2 pick that you have to address the weaknesses on your roster right now, which I think everyone would agree is finding a young cornerback for the future, finding offensive linemen, young linebackers, and I think even over edge rusher, finding a partner for Cam Hayward and Marvin Leal for the long term that can fit in there on that defensive line. Like Jenna said, we're going to have all offseason to talk about this kind of stuff, but it's always important to look at each position. We'll keep doing that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Well, thank you for having me as always. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner, and on WPXI, both locally and on our app. And you can stream it too. So tune in for Sportscasts. Got some fun stuff ahead. But yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jenna, for joining us. As always, you can find me, Chris Carter, on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also find my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics. You can also find this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on your favorite podcasting platform, and especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. You can also, if you want to help out the show, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time, and you get a shout out at the end of the show. And remember, Monday is our first mock draft Monday of the season. We'll be doing that all the way to the NFL draft. So if you want to check me out at Carter Critiques on Twitter, I'll have a post up that people can post their things on. You can also check it in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group where I'll post. Be sure to post it either under the post that I make on Facebook or under the post I make on Twitter. I'm not considering random ones that just get sent to me all the time because people do it every day of the week. So be sure to put it in those. That's the field that I'll be using to decide that. So we'll do mock draft Monday when we're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But until then, have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.